Hey everyone, we want to welcome you to the Deeper Dive podcast of Hopevale Church. This is where we take the message from the weekend and we keep the conversation going during the week. I'm Dan Davis, senior pastor here at Hopevale. I'm joined by Sam Burke, our next gen pastor at Hopevale. Hey Sam.
Hey Dan.
Here we are. We are in week 3 of our No Place Like Home series. We're also in the fall,
yes.
which you talked about. So for those of you on YouTube, thought I would rock out the flannel. I felt like you gave me permission to do that.
It was great going in, driving in to church. Every time you preach, you're like there at 7:30 in the morning, and just the frost and the cool. And I was like, oh, it finally feels like fall. This is great.
And colors, right? Fall colors are just so good. Yes, I'm becoming that older person who's like, when you're young, I'm like, oh, summer's the best. Summer's and I just love fall. So this is great time. So so we're in that, and you were talking about fall. You were also talking about, okay, so here's my question. We're going to kind of shallow end this first. We've been using this series to talk about what it means for Hopevale to be your church home.
Right,
we've been drawing some parallels between our church home and what we do in our own home.
Right.
So yesterday you talked about service. So
yes.
I want to know about like service in the Burke home. Okay, your kids.
Right.
Do they have chores? Is there a chore chart? Are you like, because parents can be like highly systematic and loose, and what do you do?
We've tried a little bit of everything in the Burke home. When they were little, we tried the chore chart with the little like magnets and everything. Yes. That worked for like 2 weeks. It was like, it doesn't work anymore. And what we found is the chore charts and all that are only as good as you're willing to have accountability for it. But then life is crazy, and we're just like, oh my goodness. So as of right now, what we tell our kids is keep your rooms manageable. We don't expect perfection.
Manageable is like the word interesting, right?
Yes.
You can have a lot of wide interpretation of what manageable
There
is.
is.
Yes.
So like Nick, our 15-year-old, we say no food left over in your room, no dishes. Make sure it's just kind of straightened up. So it's funny because I'm a real like neat freak, perfectionist. Like everything's got a place to go. Everything needs to be cleaned up, look a certain way. And so I walk into his room and it drives me nuts because it's like clothes everywhere and all this stuff. And I'm like, Nick, you got to pick this up. You got to do this. And so we just, for our own sanity, we were like, okay, they're up in the upstairs part of our house, and most of life happens in the downstairs in our basement. So we're like, if those areas are clean, upstairs, can you just manage it?
Okay.
Can it be manageable? Do you know where your clothes are? Can you get your clothes that are dirty to the laundry? Just take care of your stuff. And then we're not going to nitpick over like, is this here or is this there kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we've landed in to keep our own mental health okay.
So I'm like laughing so hard because, we raised 2 teenage boys as well. And like if you're a parent of younger kids and you hear this, no food or dishes in the room, like you're probably just really judgy right now. And all I'm saying is if you're parenting teenage boys, that's like a huge win, right?
Yeah.
We don't want a rodent problem. No. We don't want, So that really is a thing, definitely. So here's a question for you, because you guys are in a really unique stage. You've got a high schooler, middle schooler, and elementary. Do you expect the same from all 3, or do you have a parenting philosophy where as they get older, you expect a little more, to use a word that you used yesterday, to contribute?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So each one of our kids is very different from each other. Okay. So Nick is a naturally responsible kid, which is beautiful because we don't have a lot of like follow up behind with him.
Okay.
He's messy, but it's kind of like when he knows he needs to clean up stuff, he does it. Like we don't have a lot of like, go do this, go do that kind of stuff. So our parenting philosophy with him is like, give him as much responsibility as he can handle, and then we come alongside and help. Jonathan is, he's a lot more random, and he's got a lot more going on with his life. And so we're a little more hands-on with him. And then Karis, our elementary daughter, she's like me. So she'll be up till 11:30 straightening her room, making sure everything looks perfect and whatever. So there's not a lot of like outside motive. Like she has a lot of internal motivation for getting that kind of stuff done. So we want them to contribute. There was a funny story like a few weeks ago where I'm getting breakfast ready. I forget which one of our kids it was, but I'm getting breakfast ready for them. And they're looking at me like, Dad, the cereal's out. And I'm like, okay, there's other things to eat for breakfast. And they're like, well, when are you going to go and get cereal? And I looked at him and I had this moment where I'm like, do I say everything that's in my head or do I just pause?
Yes, pause.
So what I said, I think what came out of my mouth was, well, there's no cereal fairy. Like it's not just going to show up. Like we have to go grocery shopping. We got to do all this stuff. And so it turned into a conversation of, Mom and Dad do all of this in the house. And what do you guys contribute? Like I went down this road and I knew I was going to preach on this, but I didn't even connect the dots. I'm like, I'm connecting the dots now, but I was like, you guys got to do at least meet us halfway with some stuff. Like we can't do all the grocery shopping, do all the laundry, pick up all this stuff, go here, do this, and you come down and go, where's my cereal? Like, yeah. So it became this like, okay, please contribute something. And we had this conversation about what can you guys contribute? We're not asking you to do everything, but can you at least do something kind of a thing? So that's been kind of our attitude and mantra with them. And we treat each one we parent them all differently and we treat them and expect things differently from each one of them. So
good. So I'm an analogy guy. And even as you were talking, I wrote a couple things down. So let's take this to the church because I wrote two things down. I wrote spiritual maturity and temperament.
Yes.
Okay, so you can have somebody who is new in the faith,
right,
but very responsible.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, yes.
And how they're going to take your message yesterday, could be different than somebody who's maybe further along in Christ, but maybe a little more, free form, expressive, spontaneous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not just naturally responsible or systematic.
Yeah. So I have a perfect example of this. I volunteer with our youth ministry as a small group leader.
Okay.
And when another guy who's a small group leader who I've known for a long time came up to me and said, hey, I want you to know my fourth grader was in the message yesterday, leaned over to me and said, he's talking to me. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And so I was talking about it and he's like, well, he's very, he's mature for his age and he's very responsible. And so he's looking at going, I need to step up and I need to serve as a fourth grader. So you could have that, and then you can also have the 35-year-olds like, this ain't for me. Like, yeah. So it's maturity and responsibility are very it's not always like a 1-for-1 kind of a thing. So
good. Okay, we'll get back to that because I think it's even as I'm talking about it, it's pretty fascinating. Yeah. So, you came out pretty strong. Okay. I feel like a journalist, but this is what I'm going to say. So you came up with a term called spiritual gluttony.
Yes.
And I noticed in your so first of all, in the message, you painted this contrast between contribute and consume.
Yes.
Talked about different ways people might consume at church, which I thought was interesting, right? So you didn't just talk about the message, you talked about the worship, you talked about the crowd vibe, the energy. You talked about coffee and donuts. You talked about lobby interaction, right? So there's a lot of different ways of things where we can get something from church, which by itself isn't
it's not
wrong.
It's not a wrong. I think I wanted to make sure I drew that contrast. It's not a wrong thing, but when it becomes an unhealthy thing.
So this is what you said then on spiritual gluttony. It's the over consumption of spiritual, religious, or church activity and content without contributing anything to it. So why did that image, or where did that image come from, and what does over consumption look like?
So where it came from, I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I talk about this consumeristic mindset?
Okay.
In a way that is, number one, maybe a little shocking to wake people up, because I think when we're in this consumeristic mindset, we don't think we are. Okay. Until we someone kind of called it out. So I was looking at, well, how can I talk about consuming? So I looked up the word consume, and one of the first like synonyms for it was gluttony. And I was like, so I looked up the definition for gluttony. It's like the overconsumption to an unhealthy degree. And I was like, what I'm talking about is exactly that. It's when we have this, it's all for me, it's about me. I come to get something from it. I never contribute to it. Because you can come to a lot like the lobby experience and you can contribute in the lobby. But if
what's that look like? What's it look like to contribute to the lobby experience?
It's to look for people who may be sitting by themselves and going over and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Like, you're actually taking a step versus like you're there to go, I'm only ever going to hang out with my people and I'm only ever going to do this and I'm here to grab, these same 3 people every week. I'm never going to look out for people who are new and visiting, that kind of stuff. Like, I just think that there's a way that you can contribute in all of these areas. Worship. If you come in and just, I like this worship music and I'm singing and there's a participatory part to worship. But if you're coming and you're like, I didn't like it, the worship wasn't for me today. Like that when I hear that over and over and over again, or the message just didn't click for me today, or it was all about me, like what I got out of it versus what I maybe can contribute to the church as a whole.
So this sounds like Jeff Foxworthy, you might be a consumer
Yes.
if, right? Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's was in my mindset of like this overconsumption thing is like when I go to church and I don't get what I want, then I complain. Because that's ultimately what a consumer mindset is. It's all about me. It's about serving me first, not serving someone else. But I need to be served, and if I'm not served, I complain about it.
Okay, so Sam, I'm going to have you connect some dots because last week we were in a conversation with some other staff members about the difference between justification, sanctification,
Yes.
right? So you are, let's say we're talking about a Christian,
Yes.
somebody who knows Christ as Savior, believes in the gospel, right? But maybe they have fallen into or slipped into or drifted into this consumer mindset or, what's wrong with that? I mean, they're saved, right? Yeah. What's the danger or what's the caution? Like, why should I care about not being a consumer?
We should care because our model is Jesus.
Okay.
And Jesus said, multiple times, I did not come to be served. I came to serve. Paul talks about in Philippians 2. He's like, your mindset should be that of Christ Jesus. Elevate others above yourself. Think of others,
Yes.
serve others. Like, so when we get into a mindset that's me first, when we get into a mindset of it's about me and what I want, when we get into a mindset about serve me, we're not acting like Christ. And I think that's the danger, because the danger is all of a sudden everything's about me.
Okay.
And it's not about, emulating Christ.
Okay, good. So building off then really the consumer conversation, you took us to 1 Peter 4, and it's a tremendous passage. Why that passage? Why was it so compelling? And what would you, particularly I think when you got to verse 10 and verse 11, like what is it about that you really want us to know and to live out of?
Yeah. 1 Peter 4, it was 1 Peter 4:10 was one of the verses that I've always gone to when I talk about serving, because it's challenging and yet encouraging at the same time, right? So it's challenging in like, hey, contribute, do something. It's encouraging to say, you've all been gifted. You're all ministers.
You have something.
Yes, you have something you can contribute. So there's this, and I think that was, and as I looked over my message, I was talking with Sarah yesterday about it. I said, I think my message was equal parts challenging and encouraging at the same time. That's what I wanted. That's what I was hoping was like, I was going to push, but I was also going to motivate and go, you've been given what it takes to contribute. Let's go all together. So that's why I've loved that verse, because there is that equal parts of challenge and encouragement. But the whole passage, like if you take 7 through 11 and even go even further with it, there's just these like, hey, watch out, look at what's going on in the world so you can pray about it. And as you're praying, love one another deeply. Because if you don't, you're going to look and see what's going on. You're just going to get offended by everything. And everybody's going to offend you. People within the church are going to offend you. There's going to be so love each other deeply, because when you choose that love, then you can look over stuff that like it'll cover over those times where you're offended by other people and the things that you bump into each other with. And then take it a step further. Don't just say I love them. Show that you love them. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling or complaining. And I said in the second service, I'm like, that's the hard part. The like without grumbling and complaining, because we can go, yeah, I'll do something for somebody else, but like, do I have to? Do I really like? But it's this opportunity that's in front of us to help take care of one another. And then he says, you've been gifted to do it. Like, so serve one another. And then you're able to be a minister to, of God's grace in its various forms. And then he highlights these two different things of like, there's the speaking part, and then there's a serving part, which I think it's all kind of the same thing altogether, but it just highlights different giftedness within the church. And I really wanted to help everyone understand, like, a lot of times the people who get the microphone get a lot of the press. Yeah. But that's not even the majority of the serving that's done in the church and the ministry that's done in the church. And so one thing that I always said in our youth ministry is like, the stage isn't everything. Like, there's multiple areas that ministry happens that Christ can do amazing, impactful ministry that has nothing to do with the stage. So I think that's what he's trying to draw in this passage, is everybody has something to contribute, to serve one another, to love one another well.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too. I think one of the things I really like about 1 Peter 4:10 is this idea of God's grace in its various forms. Yeah. Right? So that the stage people, or those of us who speak, I mean, the grace that's flowing out is different than the grace flowing out of the person with a different skill set gift set that may be more behind the scenes. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, holding that back, not to guilt trip people, but you're holding back the grace of various, a manifold, I think is another translation, where it just, the layers and the complexity and the beauty and the diversity of grace pouring out in the world. I think that's why it's so important. So we heard or saw a couple examples of stories. Now I know the story with Barry is something that Billy and Pete worked on and so forth, which was really great. And then you told Josh Frank's story as well. Tell me, even like before and after your message and thinking about those stories, what you would want people to get out of those.
Well, Josh's story is really like anybody can serve and use their giftedness for God. He was a senior in high school, and the only reason I even it clicked in my head was because he had talked to me in our small group and was like, I love doing this, and I'm in these classes for TV production and all this video editing and all this stuff, and just for him to be able, as a senior, to walk around and go, I have an investment here. And to be able to put together that so that all of our students can enjoy and remember what retreat was about and all this kind of stuff. I was like, oh, it's such a good thing. And God has used that in his life even further. I mean, he's a part of our tech team now, and he does this kind of stuff with other people, So God just uses this gift over and over again in his life in a big way still. And Barry's just a cool story. I mean, if our listeners haven't really seen his story, maybe they are just checking in and maybe haven't seen, or watched or heard Sunday's message. I encourage you to really go back and to look at Barry's story and watch it, because here's a guy who understands who God has made him to be and realizes, hey, a lot of people probably don't even know that I do this stuff, but that's okay, because I love a line he used. He said, it's really cool to see how, people all over the world can engage with this stuff and know who Jesus is because of his involvement. And Barry's never a guy that would be like patting himself on the back. Barry's never a guy who would want the spotlight. In fact, he even said, he goes, I like being behind the room, like the anonymity of it. And I think there's just something, powerfully Jesus, like with the, don't let your right hand know what your left hand's doing kind of stuff. And so I love those stories because they really highlight that, listen, anybody can, and we highlight two guys in the tech world.
Right.
But I mean, I could probably list off, kids ministry volunteers who over the years have been serving faithfully, and, kids that have grown up through the ministry. You look back and go, man, I remember so-and-so. I remember my very first ministry I worked in, there was a lady named Aggie Stockdale. She was 65, 70 years old, small group leader for high school girls. And those girls all ended up growing up, and she was at all their weddings and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And they just loved Aggie. And, some might think like, I'm not sure she would be the prototypical small group leader for a high school girl.
high school, yeah.
But they loved her, and she was a great small group leader. So anybody has something, God has gifted every single one of us to do something. The difference is, are you going to step up and contribute or not, or do you know what that is,
So let's crack that nut, right? Let's talk about this whole journey of discovery of, how do I fit? Where do I fit? You talked about Rick Warren's shape, spiritual gifts, heart, ability, passions, and experience. Now that sounds kind of like systematic and formulaic, which isn't bad or wrong, but if let's say you're talking to someone who sat in that message, said, okay, I get it. I want to contribute. I don't want to just consume. I don't know where to start, or I don't know if I really have anything to offer. What would you say to that person?
I would ask him a couple questions. The first thing I would ask him is, what gets you excited? What do you get excited about? When you think about church, when you think about life, when you think about your relationship with God, what excites you? What breaks your heart? As you look out, is it something that's going on with kids in the world? Is something going on with poverty? And what breaks your heart? And what has God led you through? What are some experiences that God has walked you through that maybe aren't too fresh?
Yeah.
Because sometimes the fresher they are, the harder it is, to really dive in and help lead someone else through it. But what are some things that God has taken you through that maybe he wants you to use in the life of somebody else? That Second Corinthians passage, with the comfort you've been given, you can comfort others with, kind of a thing. So I think those are the three questions I would ask someone. There's all kinds of spiritual gift analysis and all that kind of stuff. I pointed people to the MyFit thing, which is really hard to find.
It is hard.
But that kind of stuff those are all helpful tools. But I think those three questions are a good starting point, at least.
So I'm going to give you a 3B, which it's kind of like the flip side of the passion thing. And not that I would overly promote this, but this is what I've seen, right? So kind of not just what you're passionate about, but maybe what ticks you off.
Yes.
So let me explain this though, right? Because let's say you're part of a group or part of a ministry and it's extremely disorganized and it frustrates you to death.
Yes.
Chances are you've got administrative skills.
Right.
I've seen this. Our group isn't caring, or this church isn't caring. Chances are you just have a huge pastoral gift and heart of compassion, or somebody who brings the party.
Yeah, absolutely.
And brings fun to that. And a lot of times, here's the thing I've noticed too. This is part of my own journey. But with others is the gifts and abilities and passions that you have, we sometimes just assume everyone has them.
Right.
Because they're just natural to us, almost like breathing, right? And then when you realize that somebody doesn't, or a group doesn't respond the way, you do, it's like, well, maybe you're there for a reason. And instead of being critical, again, the organization, administrative gifts, for instance, maybe that's it, right? So I know there are so many ministries, Sam, at our church, from, I think about security to medical emergency to counters, financial, and so forth, that just we would never think of. And, the whole, okay, so I don't know how to work a tech lever or teach, right? What else? But so many things are off Sunday or, behind the scenes Sunday. And again, that's...
absolutely.
Yeah, that's really good.
When I think about passion, there's two sides of it. I think there's what you're excited about, but then also...
Right. Well, and you said break your heart, and I might get that. But there is, I think sometimes, again, the frustration thing.
Right.
Is and too, I think we would say there's trial and error, right? And sometimes so you can take 1,000,001 gift assessments, which help, but sometimes it's really in the doing,
right?
Absolutely.
And that's some of my encouragement to anyone who wants to jump in and serve, try an area out. And if that area is like, that didn't work out, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, the church is big enough, God's kingdom is big enough to try some stuff out. And if that's not a good fit, let's try to, you know, find somewhere else. It's not like you failed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bigger thing is like, you know, if kids ministry didn't work out for you, it doesn't mean ministry didn't work out for you. It just means maybe that's not where your gifting is or your fit is. So there's a perfect fit. I'm a big believer in body life stuff that, you know, Paul talks about, where he says, you know, each one of us has a role to play. Each one of us has a part that we all fit together in this big body. We all grow together. So you have a part to play. I have a part to play. We all have a part to play.
Okay, good. So that's part of the discovery part. Well, do you have anything from your story that sticks out? Like, why are you, you know, sitting in front of a mic here, right?
Yeah. So when I was younger in ministry, in college, it started in college. Like I had a homiletics class, which is preaching class.
Okay.
And my teacher was like, "You have a way of putting words together that makes people listen." And I was like,
"Oh, interesting."
I had no idea. I was like 19, 20 years old. I'm like, okay. I wanted to go into journalism when I was a high schooler.
Really?
And writing. I wanted to do sports journalism because I was baseball, basketball player. And I'm like, well, I like to write and I like to watch sports and I like to play sports. So maybe that's what my life's going to be about. And the more I would write, the more like, oh, that sounds good or that doesn't sound good. So in homiletics class, I would preach and he was like, oh, you have a way of putting words together that like is memorable. And it was funny because I remember being a senior in college and we would have chapel every day. And I had this mentor of mine and I would come back to him like, when he said it this way, wouldn't it have stuck better if he said it this way? And he just kind of rolled his eyes at me because I'm a senior in college, you know, whatever. But he kind of pointed out to me, he goes, you may have like a giftedness in teaching and communicating. And I was like, I'm 21 years old. I'm like, I hope so, because I want to be a pastor, you know, not realizing that not everybody is gifted with that kind of stuff. But I didn't know what to call it, whatever. So when I was 26 or 27, I was being recruited by another church from the one I started at. And they made me take this thing called Strengths Finder,
Okay.
Which is an assessment tool, whatever. And they give you your top 5 strengths, and my top strength was communication.
Wow. Okay.
And so it was like, oh, I have language now to put around what what God maybe has gifted me with. It was being able to communicate and use story and use words in a way that helps people, you know, it motivates people to move, kind of a thing. So that was like this affirmation of, oh, this is how God has wired me up. And so I've leaned into that pretty heavy over the years.
Okay. So your college story proved my point. You heard the speakers in chapel and you were frustrated or you were thinking about, is there a way this could be done better?
Right.
And maybe that's a test for people listening, right? It's like, wow, you know, and again, you could be arrogant about it, but you don't have to be arrogant about it.
Right.
It's just, how could I make it better?
Yeah.
What part can I play? Okay.
How about you? I'd love to hear how you've discovered your giftedness.
So this is like really interesting. And how do I tell this story, you know, under, 20 minutes?
Right, yeah.
Because I tend to lean towards introversion.
Yeah.
I can remember growing up and my mom kind of nudging me, like when somebody comes over, talk to them, look them in the eye, you know, and it's part of this whole unlikely calling thing. But when I became a Christian and started growing in my faith in college, I remember going to our campus groups and hearing people speak, going, I'd like to do that. And I think I could,
Right.
I could do it better, but I think I've got something to say.
Yeah.
And I have a voice, right? And what's interesting, I think for me, Sam, I'd put it slightly different because I would affirm that gift that you do have a way of putting words together in very memorable ways. I think I just look at things a little differently, or I'm able to connect a lot of dots and patterns that it's like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have thought about it this way, but that really does go with that. And,
Right.
Certainly I think both you and I come at it too. I think part of the teaching gift I learned is a study gift.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just for lack of a better word, the final product, right?
Right.
And so kind of college and then post-college when I was working at a bank, I was in Bible studies and learning more and talking to pastors. And even when I went to seminary, I knew it was just going to go into ministry, right? But yeah, and then I would say this too. Part of the discovery process is getting feedback from others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Taking affirmation, right? Not brushing it off, but are people affirming a gift or confirming a gift? Realizing, especially early on, it's very raw.
Yeah.
Right. So nobody's a finished product. We're not finished products,
No,
right?
Definitely not.
And so we're still kind of refining that. Now, you and I, where it's like two guys talking about, teaching. But again, I would say other gifts are that way similar
Right.
as well. I think when you were talking about the 65-year-old woman who was the small group leader, right? What do you think her gifts were, or what do you think she brought to the table and made it so effective?
She was a relator.
A relator.
And she was a
Okay.
connector.
Yeah.
So she knew how to relate to those junior girls, even at her age. I mean, it wasn't like she was trying to be a teenager. She just was genuinely interested in what was going on in those kids' lives. And she knew how to relate to them, and she knew how to connect them together and knew how to connect with them. And I think that just was a natural thing. I mean, she was from Kentucky originally, and so she was like the first person we met right out of college when we went and interviewed at this church. And she was like, "Oh, come here," and gave us this big hug and was like this welcoming, including, warm person. And I think that was a natural fit for her, was small group leading and mentoring these girls.
And I think people who have relational skills like that, I think it's a great example of they're the ones who think, well, isn't everyone this way?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And they're not. This is oversimplistic, but sometimes I think, there are head, hand, heart gifts. And, some people, again, like care gifts or encouragement gifts, right, that are very relational, which, again, boy, talk about home and church.
Absolutely.
Being at home. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
I've got a few rapid fire questions. What do you say to the person who has been burned before in serving in the church? Could be somewhere else or here. Like they stepped up and they got taken advantage of, or something got just like dumped on their plate, or somebody said, oh yeah, just try it out. And then the door was locked and they were in the room for 3 years by themselves, right? No.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who has been, right?
It depends on how fresh that is, right?
Okay.
So if it's super recent, I would say, hey, it's okay to just chill out for a second. I try to say this at the end, like there's sometimes there are seasons where, jumping in the game and serving just aren't going to be good right now. If you've been burned and burnt out on something, and then all of a sudden you're like, I got to jump in and serve again, and then you just keep going with it, you're carrying all that into the next ministry that you're working at. So I would say if it's recent, take some time, heal. It's okay to sit for a little while and to have a healing process go on. If someone is in that, it's like a PTSD kind of a thing where they're like, I can't do that right now. I would say to them, explore the why. Go back and go, okay, so why did this happen? Understand your situation. A former staff member who was my supervisor and I had this conversation about my previous church experience because I got burned pretty hard. And he said, there are going to be times where you might be in a meeting, you might be, and all of a sudden you get triggered because of something. And he said, you have to it's going to feel like, oh my gosh,
it's happening
all over again.
Yeah.
He said, and in those moments, the best thing to do is to stop, to pause, to breathe, and to go, this is not that. And then to ask, okay, so what happened here? And then how can I see this differently than there? And I think that's wise, because no situation is exactly the same. There may be things that feel the same, but the unhealthy thing that happened here may not happen here. You may project that into that. So I think the best thing to do is to stop for a second. If you're serving and you're like, or if you're like, I don't want to serve because of this, maybe it is a good, healthy time to pause for a second. But if it, like I said, if if it becomes an excuse, if it becomes like I'm just settling and I'm just gonna do whatever, then I would challenge that and say, okay, are you still hurt? Have you gone through the healing process? If you are on the other side of it and it's been a while, jump back in and realize that this is not a 1-for-1 with that all the time.
Okay.
And if it is, if you're like, oh wow, the same concerns are coming up, there's two sides of it. There's either, is there something you need to learn that you didn't learn back here? Maybe it was a learning process for you as someone serving, or maybe it's just like hey, I need to raise a flag here, and it's something that we as leaders need to learn to help our people, help volunteers better, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, no. Well, it's a real thing, right?
Yeah.
And you even recognize that when Barry did his video, right? When he said at first, we just came and sat and soaked. And I would agree. I think there are seasons.
Yep.
And then, just to be open, though, to say that the seasons aren't forever.
Right.
Okay, so here's another. What do you say to the person who says, I did my time? Right?
Retiring from it, I'm done.
Yeah.
There's the blunt way to say it. There's I would say we're never done.
Okay.
There's always something that you can contribute. Some people have said, I'm not sure I would use this language, but like, until we're dead, we're not done. Like,
Yeah.
there's always something that God has for you. I was talking to a lady in our lobby yesterday, an older lady, and she came up to me and she said, it was just a great reminder to know that we're not finished when we feel like we are. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. That there's always something you can contribute. There's reasons why in the New Testament there's different passages that talk about the older women mentoring the younger women, older men mentoring the younger men. Like, there's always something that we can pass on. There's never a expiration date.
Yes.
And I think that's a little bit of American culture of, I reached my limit, I can retire, I can go on the golf course and whatever. But I don't think that's the Christian life. We don't retire from following Jesus. So
yeah. So Sam, I would echo the older women, older men, younger men dynamic. And it's what we say about being a multi-generational church. And then I would also say too, your contribution may look different than what you were doing before. So It's not like, okay, you have to do the exact same thing you were doing.
Absolutely.
Especially, let's talk to parents, like when you were raising elementary age kids or teens or whatever. And you mentioned yesterday, because there are some people and parents who like follow their kids through ministry.
Right.
And that's great. But again, to be open that you have a contribution, but it may look different. And there certainly is, I think our church is at its best when those who have grown, are more mature in the faith, and have life wisdom in Christ to be able to share that with others.
Absolutely. And I think as you get older, it becomes more about a legacy thing, passing on a baton to the next generation, leaving a legacy, that kind of stuff, versus, I'm big into like the hero's journey kind of stuff. And so, in that hero's journey, there's the hero, and you get to play the hero for a while, but if you never transition to the mentor and you're always trying to be the hero, you can't be the hero for your entire life. At some point, the hero has to transition into the mentor role and bring up the other heroes. And so I think as you get older, your ministry shifts and changes more into a mentoring role, into a pass the torch and baton and leave the legacy with the next heroes that are coming up. I think of that, like my role has shifted here at the church more. Like I was the youth pastor for a long time, and then we brought Brent on, and so now my role is to mentor and his role is to hero in that world. And so, and I at some point he's going to have to make a transition into that and build up the next, people. And I think as we model that, if the older generations begin to model that, the younger ones go, that's the goal. The goal is to get to a place where I can leave a legacy and mentor others. And that's the thing. Like we bring up people so they can preach, bring up people so they can do the ministry and all that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, so this is like totally random. Outside of the Bible, in the world of film, in the world of literature, DC Universe, Marvel, like who are your favorite mentors?
So I'm a Star Wars guy. So I love the whole, like, they always have a master and apprentice and they have the role. They have these roles built in, you know. So in the Star Wars world, there's the Yoda figures, and then in the new movies, which or whatever, there's Luke has become this, but he's a jaded mentor. So it's like, you know, don't meet your heroes because they kind of a thing. But yeah, it's that kind of a thing where there's this mentor figure who brings along the hero, and then the hero transitions into the mentor, and then so on and so forth. So
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my landing based on your answer, and it wasn't even here. We say that home is where you serve, that everyone has a contribution to make. You know, almost throughout all of history and throughout all of culture, multi-generations lived under the same roof.
Absolutely.
And grandparents and maybe even great-grandparents, right, were part of the home.
Yep.
And they told the stories. They shared the wisdom.
Yep.
Right? And so those kind of relationships, boy, if we can continue to keep that going on in the church, I think's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so,
how great
yes.
would that be if you had just these multi-generations and everybody had a part to play? The older generations are training and teaching the younger generations through story, through reminder, through, you know, these legacy moments. Then you got the younger generations who are carrying the torch of doing the minute. I mean, like,
which is why I loved you shared. That's why I loved you shared Josh's story, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like you. I hope we are not the kind of church that's like wait your turn,
Right. Absolutely.
right? And that we're going to share ministry across the board. Wow, this is good. Any parting words? Any parting shot?
Let's get in the game. Let's do this.
Great.
That's my parting shot.
Well, this has been a great series. We're talking about what we share in common as a church family and to make Hopevale our church home. And I'll talk more about that next week. But once again, we want to thank you for listening today. And as always, we invite you to join us again next time when we take a deeper dive.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also, make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it's posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family here at Hopevale Church.